In the summer of 1955, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago named Emmett Till was excited to visit his family in Mississippi. His mother, Mamie, tried to warn him that he was heading into a different world, a world with brutal, unwritten rules for black people in the Jim Crow South. What was supposed to be a fun summer vacation ended in a horrific act of violence, an act that would expose the country's deep-seated bigotry and help ignite a movement. This is the story of how racism led to one of America's most brutal murders. Emmett Lewis Till, born on July 25, 1941, was the only child of Mamie and Lewis Till. He grew up on Chicago's vibrant South Side, raised by his single mom. Everyone knew him as Bobo, a charismatic and confident kid who loved being the center of attention and making people laugh. After a battle with polio at age 6, he was left with a slight stutter. His mom taught him a little trick to manage it: just whistle softly before speaking. In August 1955, Emmett's great-uncle, Mose Wright, came to visit from Mississippi. When it was time to go back, he planned on taking Emmett's cousin Wheeler with him. Emmett, who was always up for an adventure, begged his mom to let him go, too. Mamie was worried. She knew the South was a dangerous place for a black boy from the North who didn't understand its rigid racial codes. She sat him down for the talk, a conversation no parent should ever have to have. She warned him to be humble, to say yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and even to bow his head to white people. It wasn't just about manners, it was about survival. She reluctantly agreed. The day before he left, she gave him a signet ring that had belonged to his late father, engraved with the initials LT. They kissed goodbye at the Chicago train station. It was the last time she would ever see her son alive. To really get what happened to Emmett Till, you have to understand the world he was stepping into. Mississippi in 1955 was nothing like Chicago. It was the heart of the Jim Crow South, a society built entirely on white supremacy. And it wasn't just about separate water fountains or sitting at the back of the bus. Jim Crow was a system of laws and unspoken rules designed to terrorize and control black Americans. Violence was always the tool used to enforce these rules. Mississippi had more lynchings than any other state. In 1955, only about 5% of eligible black Mississippians were even registered to vote. And anyone who dared to challenge the system paid a heavy price. Just months before Emmett's visit, voting rights activists Reverend George Lee and Lamar Smith were murdered for their work. No one was ever held accountable. But the most explosive rule of all revolved around the idea of protecting white womanhood. Any move by a black man toward a white woman, a look, a word, a gesture, could be seen as a capital offense, punishable by death. This was the hostile, unforgiving world that a confident, joke-loving 14-year-old from Chicago was about to walk into. On August 24, 1955, after a long day of picking cotton with his cousins, Emmett and a group of other teens headed to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market in the tiny town of Money, Mississippi. Inside the store was 20-year-old Carolyn Bryant, the white woman who ran the place with her husband, Roy. For decades, what exactly happened in that store has been a subject of debate. Eyewitnesses, including Emmett's cousin Simeon Wright, have said that Emmett didn't do anything threatening. He just bought his candy. But Carolyn Bryant later claimed in court that Emmett grabbed her hand and asked her for a date. Years later, in a 2017 book, a historian reported that Bryant admitted she had fabricated the most damning parts of her story, though she later told the FBI she never recanted. What isn't disputed by his cousins is what happened as they left the store. Emmett turned around and let out a loud, big city wolf whistle. For a kid from Chicago, it might have been a harmless joke. But in Money, Mississippi, it was a death sentence. His cousins were terrified. They knew he had crossed a line, and they rushed him away from the store. But the story had already started to spread. For days went by. The teens might have thought the whole thing had blown over. But Roy Bryant, Carolyn's husband, had been out of town. When he got back and heard the story, he was filled with racist rage. He went and got his half-brother, J.W. Millam. Around 2:30 in the morning on August 28th, the two armed men kicked in the door of Emmett's 64-year-old great-uncle, Mose Wright. They demanded he hand over the boy from Chicago. Wright pleaded with them, he offered them money, but they didn't care. They dragged Emmett from his bed at gunpoint and threw him in the back of their truck. All his family could do was watch, helpless, as the truck disappeared into the dark. What they did next is almost unimaginable. Bryant and Millam took Emmett to a barn and tortured him for hours. They pistol whipped him until his face was destroyed. They gouged out one of his eyes. Then they drove him to the banks of the Tallahatchie River. There, they shot him in the head. To make sure his body disappeared forever, they tied a heavy cotton gin fan to his neck with barbed wire and threw his mutilated body into the river. 3 days later, a boy fishing found the corpse. It was so bloated and disfigured that the only way to identify him was by the silver ring on his finger, the one his mother had given him, engraved with his father's initials, LT. When Emmett's body was sent back to Chicago, it arrived in a sealed casket. The orders from Mississippi were clear: do not open it. But his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, refused. When she saw what they had done to her son, she made a decision that would change American history. She told the funeral director, "Let the world see what I've seen." She insisted on an open casket funeral. For 4 days, tens of thousands of people filed past her son's coffin at a church in Chicago, forced to bear witness to the horror. Then, she allowed Jet magazine and the Chicago Defender to publish photographs of her son's brutalized body. Those graphic images sent a shockwave across the country and around the world. Mamie's courageous act turned her private grief into a public indictment of America. As Reverend Jesse Jackson later said, her decision turned a crucifixion into a resurrection. Even with the whole country watching, there was never much hope for justice in Mississippi. Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam were arrested and charged with murder, but the trial was a total sham. It was held in a town whose slogan, ironically, was "a good place to raise a boy." Black people and women weren't allowed to serve on juries, so the defendants were judged by 12 white men. In an incredible act of bravery, Mose Wright got on the stand, pointed directly at Bryant and Millam, and identified them as the men who took his great-nephew. For a black man to publicly accuse a white man in a Mississippi court was practically a death sentence in itself. But it didn't matter. The defense lawyers claimed the body was too disfigured to be identified, and that this was all a conspiracy cooked up by the NAACP. After deliberating for just 67 minutes, and a juror later admitted they only took that long to take a soda pop break, the jury came back with their verdict: not guilty. Bryant and Millam walked out of the courtroom free men, kissing their wives for the cameras. A few months later, protected by double jeopardy laws, the two men sold their story to Look magazine for $4,000. They confessed to the murder in gruesome detail, explaining exactly how and why they had killed Emmett Till. No one was ever punished for the crime. The fight for justice for Emmett Till is still going on. His family created the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation to make sure no one ever forgets what happened to him. Learning this history is the first step, but supporting the organizations that keep this memory alive is how we ensure the lessons from this tragedy are never lost. Mamie Till Mobley said she wanted the world to see what they did to her boy, and the world saw. The murder of Emmett Till and the acquittal of his killers weren't just another lynching. They were a breaking point. The sheer brutality of it all, and the blatant injustice of the trial, galvanized an entire generation. Mamie Till Mobley said she wanted the world to see what they did to her boy, and the world saw. The murder of Emmett Till and the acquittal of his killers weren't just another lynching. They were a breaking point. The sheer brutality of it all, and the blatant injustice of the trial, galvanized an entire generation. The anger and outrage fueled the growing civil rights movement. Just 100 days after Emmett's murder, a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She later said that when she made that choice, "I thought of Emmett Till and I just couldn't go back." A young minister named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was deeply shaken by the murder, would soon lead the Montgomery bus boycott. And 8 years to the day after Emmett was murdered, Dr. King would stand before the nation and deliver his "I Have a Dream" speech. For over a century, activists fought to make lynching a federal crime. After more than 200 failed attempts, President Joe Biden finally signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law on March 29, 2022. Emmett Till's murder laid bare the savagery of American racism. It showed a system that would let a 14-year-old boy be tortured and killed for a whistle, and then let his murderers brag about it. But out of that darkness, a mother's incredible courage lit a fire that would help reshape a nation. Her son's life was brutally cut short, but his death would echo forever in the ongoing fight for justice and equality.